Hey, tonight we slip past the vermilion gates of the Tang Dynasty, our sandals whispering across mosaic tiles slick with dew, our breath catching in the scent of burnt sandalwood and red plum blossoms. In the hush of the inner court, somewhere behind the gilded lattice, a girl barely out of childhood waits. Her name is Wu Zetian, but the world will come to know her as Wu Zetian. Right now, though she's just one of many, another fluttering robe in the harem's pecking order, where rank is inked in eyeliner and treachery tastes like sweet wine. You probably won't survive this, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And if you're listening from somewhere unusual or it's a weird hour, post your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive at the gate to Chang'an's imperial palace just after nightfall. A eunuch bows too low to be sincere and leads you past carved dragon columns into the walled garden that feels more like a cage than a sanctuary. Lanterns flicker. Somewhere, a stringed zither plays off-key, or maybe that's just how your ears translate fear. Wu Zhao doesn't see you, of course. She's kneeling, fingers splayed on the cold floor, practicing the correct position to greet Emperor Taizong. Her wrists tremble just slightly beneath the silk sleeves, pale with either terror or frostbite. The Tang court, for all its golden roofs and poetry competitions, is no place for a girl to let her guard down, especially not one who arrived with no powerful family to protect her. She's only 14, already sharper than her tutors, already listening far more than she speaks. But tonight something's different. You see it in the way she paws, not in obedience, but in calculation, as if even now she's remapping the palace, turning servants into pawns, silk screens into escape routes. The moment Taizong glances her way, something behind her eyes hardens. History books will later call this her first night with the emperor. Some say he was too old and too ill to do more than sigh. Others claim she captivated him with a story about a fox spirit and a drowning moon. Historians still argue whether Wu truly won him over with her beauty or with her ability to vanish from memory until she was needed. You drift through the court corridors behind her, past the lacquered panels and ink-stained scrolls. The harem hierarchy is rigid, consorts of various ranks, all under the empress, all jealous, all aware that one night in the emperor's bed could change everything. But it's not the empress who watches Wu tonight. It's a thin-faced maidservant, with eyes like old rice paper. You swear she isn't blinking. At midnight, a small wooden box appears at the foot of Wu's bed. No sender, no inscription, just the faint scent of camphor and blood orange peel inside. Nestled on velvet is a bronze mirror, not polished enough to reflect her clearly, just enough to catch vague shapes. Wu tilts her face toward it, and for a moment, just a breath, there's no reflection at all. She stares. You stare. Goosebumps scatter across your arms. A strange wind pushes through the room, though all the windows are shut. Some later say this was the beginning of her second sight. Others say the mirror came from an older palace one, where concubines were buried alive with emperors, and their souls etched themselves into metal. Fringe lore insists the mirror once belonged to Empress Elzechina's first empress regnant hand, was cursed to only reflect truth. When the viewer is ready to see it, Wu locks the mirror in a box beneath her pillow. She doesn't sleep. At dawn, the emperor summons her. The walk across the stone courtyard takes an hour, though it's barely 100 paces. Guards don't glance at her. That's part of the test. If no one looks, you might be dead already. When she kneels beside the imperial bed, Taizong is half propped. On cushions, a scroll half-read in his lap. His breath rattles. The dragon seal lies casually beside him, as though any hand could reach for it. His own is trembling, age gout, or paranoia. He looks at her and says one word. Why? She doesn't ask for context. She just answers, because someone had to. He nods later, after the food is cleared, and the handmaidens retreat, and the poetry competition is called off due to ill health. Wu Zhao is assigned a private tutor, a male tutor, unusual, dangerous, a scholar from Silla, thin as a paintbrush, and always smelling faintly of pine sap. He teaches her classic texts. She learns them, then rewrites them. In margins, she starts composing her own version of the Book of Changes. But hers includes a hidden hexagramma symbol no one else in the palace recognizes. A riddle that promises rise through loss, clarity through betrayal. You notice the first tiny act of sabotage 3 nights later. Wu removes the candle from the bronze sconce in the hallway, just enough to cast a longer shadow across the tiles. That shadow disguises the entrance to a door servants forget is there. A supply closet door, so it seems. She waits, listens, times her movements by the bells. 1 hour before dawn, she slips through it, just for a moment. When she returns, her sleeve is dusted with something pale. Bone, ash. It clings longer than it should. From that night on, she dreams differently, and so do you. The bronze mirror sits silent beneath your pillow. You wake with its shape outlined in your mind, shallow, unblinking. Wu Xiao doesn't speak of it, not to her attendants, not to the other concubines, but each morning, before anyone else stirs, she takes it out and gazes into it for exactly 9 breaths. Nothing happens, or rather, nothing that anyone else would notice. But the way she moves through the palace changes. She no longer avoids eye contact. Her footsteps grow deliberate. She starts standing a little too close to the latticework, where whispers travel easily. Listening, absorbing. Every word becomes a thread, and she is already weaving a net. One day, she watches an imperial guard discipline a junior eunuch for dropping a lacquer tray. The tray breaks, and the sound echoes like a gunshot through the silent garden. But Wu isn't watching the tray. She's watching the twitch in the guard's left in nervousness. Fear. She stores the knowledge away like a dry plum pit. That night, she dreams of the mirror again. This time, her reflection does appear, but it isn't her as she is now. It's her dressed in red robes, with a phoenix crown, seated on the imperial throne. Her lips are stained black with ink. The dream Wu looks directly at her and whispers, "Bury the past alive." You bolt upright. So does she. On the surface, her life continues as expected. She's one of the talented ladies, a mid-tier concubine with minimal influence and no children. Most women in this role fade into the background, become silhouettes at poetry contests, or die quietly from homesickness. But not Wu. One morning, a gift arrives from a high-ranking noblewoman, an ornate lacquered screen for her chamber, painted with a dragon and tiger locked in combat. She places it precisely so that it reflects the mirror's position from the opposite wall. Anyone who walks between them becomes trapped between beast and beast. It's a subtle message. I know. Who watches me? She tests the mirror more boldly now. She places it in the sunlight. She angles it to catch the silhouette of a passing servant. When a particularly cruel older concubine visits, The mirror fogs instantly as if breathing on glass. Wu never lets it show, but that same afternoon, she has that woman reassigned to the cold storage kitchens, where meat is preserved and dreams go to die. Word spreads quietly. Some say Wu is touched by spirits. Others say she's mad, but no one says it too loud. Then one night, the mirror reveals something she doesn't expect. Not a face, not a future, but a crack. A thin, branching line across the polished surface. She blinks, and it's gone. But it was there, and worse, it was moving by the end of that week. She receives an invitation to a private audience with Emperor Taizong. Only 3 other women are summoned. She's the lowest in rank. One is the Empress herself, and the other 2 are favored. Consorts known for their musical skills. The setting is informal, meant to relax. An outdoor pavilion lit by lanterns in red and gold. Floating lotuses in the pond. Silk cushions. Wine perfumed with osmanthus. But even before the performance begins, Wu notices a slip. A servant bows incorrectly. Once, then again, he's nervous, sweating, carrying a tea tray with 6 cups for only 5 guests, she calculates. One of them isn't meant to finish the night. When the emperor raises a cup and offers it to her directly, she smiles and offers it to the empress instead. A playful gesture, a nod to humility, a trap sidestepped later. When the empress retires with a splitting headache and blood trickling from one nostril, Wu says nothing. She simply fingers the edge of the lacquered screen behind her seat. That night, the mirror shows her the same crack, but it's grown wider now, almost like a river. She moves the mirror again, not beneath her pillow, but behind the throne. Dais in the emperor's private study. How, let's just say, eunuchs are loyal for complicated reasons, and Wu has made a habit of memorizing the names of their dead sisters. Now, when Taizong speaks with advisors, the mirror listens. She learns of famine uprisings in the west, of a failed border negotiation with the Tibetans, of the emperor's growing distrust of his eldest son. She learns the tax coffers are emptier than they appear, and she learns that Taizong has begun to fear death. He consults Taoist mystics in the dead of night. He fasts. He orders rare elixirs from the south made of gold dust and crushed pearls. Historians still argue whether his decline was due to illness, mercury poisoning, or sheer paranoia. But Wu sees the change. He touches her less, speaks to her less. Yet she is kept close. He is terrified of dying with unfinished power, and in the mirror, she begins to see shadows behind his throne. The mirror begins to hum at night, faintly, as if it remembers music no one has played in centuries. That week, a shipment of books arrives from Dunhuang. Taoist texts, mostly forgotten. One of them contains an illustration of a mirror, very much like hers referred to as a soul basin, that reveals not truth, but possibility, the shape of potential futures. But only one version survives past the final page. Wu spends nights copying the diagrams by candlelight. She learns to position the mirror to reflect not light but intention. She draws her own blood, just once, just enough to tint the edges red. It whispers, now dot. At a court gathering during the Ghost Festival, she volunteers to read an original poem. Everyone expects something graceful. She delivers a verse about drowning a silk moth in ink to capture its dreams. No one claps, but the emperor stares at her for a long, long time. That night, the empress arranges for Wu's favorite attendant to be transferred to a literary duty. Wu doesn't react. She simply sends the woman a folded paper crane and a piece of red thread. The next morning, the attendant is missing out. The Empress's hair, usually so thick, appears noticeably thinner. Behind Wu's mirror, a tiny second crack has formed. Not a flaw, a mouth. You hear it sigh, and Wu smiles. You walk alongside her, now not just through palace halls, but in the folds of her breath. Something's shifted in Wu Zhao. The girl who first tiptoed into Taizong's bedchamber is gone. In her place is a woman who never walks faster than she must, never turns her back without reflection, never shows all of her teeth. When she smiles, she's sleeping next to the tiger now. The emperor is ill more often than he is not. His coughing fits have turned harsh, barking sounds echoing into the early hours of the morning like some dying animal under the brocade sheets. No one dares speak of it, not aloud, but the scent of medicine now lingers longer than incense. You note how Wu no longer flinches when it happens. She just adjusts the cushion under his neck and pours another cup of ginseng tea. One hand always steady, and behind her, as always, the mirror waits. Some say it reflects nothing. Others say they've seen things in it they regret. One maid refuses to enter the room after glimpsing herself weeping blood in its surface, though her face was dry. Another swears the mirror showed her cradling a child. She never had. Wu keeps the mirror covered now, mostly, except during the hours between the second and third night watch. That's when the emperor sleeps deepest, and that's when she asks. The mirror questions in her mind. It never answers, not directly. But after each session, something shifts. One evening, a folded scrap of silk is slipped under her door. It's crimson, soft as breath. Upon it, an embroidered tiger with amber, eyes and claws tipped in gold thread. Beneath the paw, crushed and small, is a plum blossom, subtle, vicious. She recognizes the stitchwork. It's the favorite pastime of consort Zhao, the emperor's longest-standing paramour. The message is clear. You're next. Wu doesn't flinch. Instead, she takes the cloth, folds it twice, and burns it in her brazier, while humming a lullaby only her dead sister used to sing. When the ashes settle, she writes a letter. It's not signed, but it contains 3 lines of Temp's poetry with hidden characters spelling out a phrase. Tiger's paws slip on blood. The next morning, consort Zhao is found with bruises on her throat and a shattered ceramic vase at her feet. Officially, a fainting spell. Quietly, attempted suicide. Whispered, something pushed her. You and Wu both know it wasn't the mirror that acted. It was the woman who sleeps beside the tiger. You see, Emperor Taizong has begun to dream of demons. He speaks of them in riddles, now how they wait beyond the carved doors of his chamber. Sometimes they wear his ministers' faces. Other times, they weep in voices that sound like his dead concubines. He fears going mad. Wu, dutiful and sweet, makes him calming teas. She chants prayers. She lays her palm on his fevered brow. She never tells him that 3 of the concubines he speaks of were helped into an early grave by subtle poisons, the kind that mimic wasting sickness, the kind Wu now keeps in a hollow bone hairpin. One night, he wakes in a sweat and grips her arm. You'll protect me, won't you? He gasps, his breath hot and sour. Wu leans in, her voice soft as fog. Of course, my emperor, even from yourself. She's promoted the next morning. No announcement, no ceremony, but her food arrives first in the courtyard. Her sedan chair is carried by stronger men, and a new hairpin of pure gold rests beside her comb. She's still not empress, but she's closer than anyone else. You follow her to the eastern wing of The palace, a place rarely visited by the emperor now. It houses archives, old scrolls, forgotten names. Here Wu reads. She reads the annals of Empress L. She reads medical manuals. She reads funeral rites. And once, just once, she unrolls a banned scroll on the influence of female stars in the imperial horoscope. An astrology text deemed dangerous because of what it says about women born under the crimson water sign, that they consume power, the way fire consumes dry leaves. Historians still argue whether Wu believed in these portents or used them to manipulate those who did. What we know is this: she never forgets what she reads, nor what she sees. One morning, in the reflection of her mirror, she notices something odd, not within the mirror, but behind her. A shadow not cast by her form. It hovers for just a moment. Small, slight. The shape of a child. She turns, and nothing's there. Later, that same week, she begins stitching a small child's robe. No one asks why. She stores it in a lacquer box. Beneath the bed, behind the mirror. That same night, one of the junior concubines is caught trying to poison the emperor's soup. It's not Wu. She would never be so obvious. But Wu is the one who finds the poison. Or so she claims. She kneels before the emperor, the broken porcelain bowl cradled in her palms like the bones of a bird. I would die to protect you, she says. His eyes glisten. His fingers tighten around hers. That night, he calls her my clever one. From then on, he sleeps more deeply with her. Beside him, but you. You start to dream in layers. In one dream, Wu is riding a black horse across a snowy field, dressed as a man, her eyes lined in red. In another, she's climbing a staircase made of books, each step a text she's rewritten. And in the most chilling, she stands atop the emperor's throne, not sitting, but watching something beneath the floorboards writhe. You wake with your mouth dry, your heart beats slower than it should be. Beside you, in the dream, whispers, there's more than one kind of tiger. She's right. Some sleep beside you, some wear your crown, and some, like her, wear nothing at all and still devour you. The night is damp, the moon a sliver like a fingernail curling above the eaves of the palace. You follow Wu Zhao as she slips away from the warmth of silk quilts and ivory combs into the heart of the forbidden, the emperor's private garden, or what's left of it. Most concubines never see it. Fewer return, speaking of it clearly. They say it's cursed. She calls it necessary. A single lantern sways in her hand, soft gold spilling across gravel paths lined with jade pebbles and black pine. Her embroidered shoes make no sound as she walks. You trail behind, silent as your own breath, unsure if she knows you're there or if you're part of the garden's memory now. Through a gap in a moss-choked screen of wisteria vines, Wu slips inside. The air smells like rust and rotting plum blossoms. The garden is enclosed, dead still. No wind moves the trees. The moonlight seems to hover above the stones rather than fall on them. This is not the garden shown to guests. There are no peonies here, no playful koi, no soft benches carved for poetry readings. Instead, there are stones, large, flat, cold ones, arranged not naturally, but in a pattern. Wu steps between them like she's following a tune only she can hear. Her lantern swings low, and for the first time, you see it. A tiny inscription carved into the edge of each stone. One name per slab. Some famous, some forgotten. All female. She's walking in a cemetery the emperor pretends doesn't exist. Each stone marks a concubine lost to scandal. exile, or illness. Wu kneels beside one worn smooth with age. The character for wind is barely legible now. You watch her trace it with a finger, murmuring something too faint to catch. Then she opens a small wooden box and places a sprig of jasmine inside a carved depression on the slab down. She says aloud, "You deserved better." Historians still argue whether this garden of bones ever physically existed or whether it's a poetic invention from later chronicles, meant to illustrate Wu's obsession with power and remembrance. But here, it is cold, real, and growing, because Wu isn't just mourning, she's adding new names. Another slab has recently been placed, still beside it lies a chisel wrapped in silk. She doesn't use it, not yet, but she places it deliberately beside the next stone, as if waiting for someone else to deserve their name etched in history's teeth. At the farthest corner of the garden sits a circular bench of white stone, strangely untouched by moss. She sits on it and pulls out a folded parchment. You peek over her shoulder. It's a map of the palace, but not just any map. This one shows crawl spaces, drainage tunnels, servants' shortcuts that wind beneath kitchens and libraries, and even the emperor's sleeping quarters. She studies it by lantern light, lips pressed together in quiet focus. Her finger taps a spot near the bell tower, then another near the concubine's bathing pool. You recognize the pattern 3 points of a triangle, and at the center, her chambers. Wu is mapping the palace like a general plots a battlefield. A shadow passes overhead. You flinch, but Wu doesn't move. It's only a night bird, or something that used to be. She folds the map and tucks it back into her sleeve, stands, and makes her way to a small pavilion at the garden's edge. This one is newer, polished, well-maintained. Inside, an altar rests beneath embroidered crimson banners, but there's no deity carved here, no god to worship, just a mirror. Not the mirror, but a replica framed in gold leaf, burnished to a deadly shine. Here, Wu speaks aloud. I remember your names. I won't end like you. Her voice doesn't echo. She places a lock of her hair into a tiny bowl at the base of the altar. It sizzles as it burns. Somewhere nearby, a nightjar calls 3 times, once for death, once for memory, once for change. Back in the inner court, no one notices her return, except one. An old eunuch with eyes like chipped stone is sweeping the hallway outside her chamber. He bows slightly, then murmurs, "Was the garden kind tonight, talented lady?" Wu pauses. Then, softly, "She was patient." He nods, like someone who's heard ghosts speak before. That night, Wu lays the replica mirror face down beneath her bed. She takes out the original, the one with the growing crack, and holds it up, no longer hiding it, no longer afraid, and this time it moves. Not the mirror, but the image inside. You see a courtyard drenched in red banners, soldiers in formal ranks, a woman, older regal, in crimson robes sitting on a high throne. Her face is Wu's, older by decades. Her gaze holds the world still. Her lips are unmoving, but the air hums with one word. Soon you blink, and so does she. The mirror goes dark again, and Wu laughs, not cruelly, not wildly, but with the relief of someone who has seen the storm and chosen to walk into it anyway. Later, that week, she sends a tray of fruit preserves to consort May, who once replaced her bath oil with lye. Nothing happens, not immediately, but 3 days later, consort May claims to see faces in her soup. Her attendants find her shaking in her robes, babbling about black-eyed children. She's quietly sent to a mountain temple to recover her balance. Does not comment. But the next time she walks past the garden, a new stone waits at the gate. Blank. For now, you feel it, don't you? The shifting in the air. Wu Zhao is not surviving the inner court anymore. She's shaping it, one stone at a time. You follow Wu Zhao by candlelight now, shadows curling behind her like obedient cats. Her footsteps lead you to the scriptorium deep inside the Eastern Archive wing, where dust settles in the spines of dynasties and silence is a living thing. Few women enter here. Fewer still return with ink on their hands, but Wu does. You slip in after her. She lights no lamp, just fingers her way along the wall until her hand finds a familiar groove, the edge of the 6th shelf, where the floorboard beneath creaks twice, then yields. It's not magic, it's memory. She's memorized everything. The rows of documents, the smell of aged bamboo strips, even the places where rats chewed through tax records from the previous reign. She's not here to read, she's here to write. A low desk sits in the corner, tucked between a basket of crushed cinnabar and a stack of imperial reports. She rolls out a narrow strip of silk and unseals a tiny bottle of ink, thicker than usual, almost clotted. She dips her brush and begins to write, not with words of flattery or poetry, but with lies, but very useful lies. She is forging imperial correspondence notes between court ministers, false statements of favor, fake edicts endorsed by trusted generals. Not to be used now, but later, in a moment of fracture. They are seeds. Each document, a trap that will bloom when the right breeze passes. She signs them not with her name, but with phrases that sound official and harmless, as discussed previously, or under direct imperial observation. Clever, quiet, fatal. One scroll, though, is different, personal, swiftly written, sealed in red wax and marked with a character for silence. She slips it into her sleeve. You never learn what it says. But 3 days later, the Minister of Rites is dismissed from court, in disgrace, accused of taking bribes from Buddhist monasteries. Coincidence? Hardly, especially when his replacement just happens to be a man whose daughter once studied poetry with Wu in Luoyang. Historians still argue whether Wu truly wrote her own rise into the archives, or if later record keepers twisted events to match her legend. But here, in this lamplight, you can smell the ink. You can see the dampness in the brush. You can hear history being invented, and sometimes corrected, because she doesn't just write, she rewrites. You notice one scroll already unfolded. Genealogy of Empress Wang's family line. Several names are crossed out and replaced. Ages are adjusted. One dead relative is now mysteriously alive. Another, who lived honorably, is labeled as having taken part in a scandalous affair. Quiet sabotage. Wu is eroding Empress Wang's legacy, not with swords or screams, but with soft brushstrokes and clerical whispers. The best part, when these changes are found, they won't point to Wu. They'll blame some overworked, half-blind scribe from the provinces. Someone already punished. Someone already forgotten. But every lie etched in ink draws her closer to something she cannot forge. Real power, and with power comes the risk of exposure. One rainy evening, you follow her back through the servant tunnels with the scroll hidden in her sleeve. Her slipper snags on a floor tiled barely, and she stumbles just enough for a sealed letter to tumble out and land by a guard's foot. He bends down, picks it up, looks at her dot, then tucks it into his robe and says nothing. Later, She sends him a robe of fine wool and a vial of imported perfume. No note, no signature. He disappears from court 2 weeks later. Some say he retired. Others say he drowned in the moat under unclear circumstances. Wu says nothing, but she stops using the tunnels for a time. Instead, she starts embedding her secrets elsewhere, in plain sight. You watch her kneel in the embroidery room, surrounded by older concubines, sewing mandarin duck patterns and longevity charms. Wu chooses a phoenix motif dangerous for someone of her rank. Only empresses and women of extraordinary merit may claim that bird. No. One stops her, the others assume its arrogance. They don't see what she's stitching within the wings. Tiny characters in pearl thread, visible only at a certain angle. Messages, warnings, maybe instructions. One reads, "Loyalty rots." Another, "Watch the tea." Another, "The dead still." Whisper, she begins gifting these items to various women across the court. An embroidered pillow for a low-ranking consort with access to the emperor's sleeping quarters. A sash for a noblewoman whose brother commands cavalry near Luoyang. A handkerchief for a palace singer with sharp ears and a sharper mind. Each thread another ripple. One day, an old servant finds her with blood on her thumb, pricked by a needle, and remarks, "Such a small wound." Wu replies, "The smallest wounds fester the longest," and smiles. The next evening, she's summoned by Empress Wang herself. The message arrives sealed, marked urgent. She's escorted not to the main receiving hall, but to a narrow room behind. The Hall of Jade echoes, where gifts are usually sorted for diplomatic envoys. Odd, you follow her. Inside, Empress Wang sits in full formal wear, her face rigid as lacquer, a painted smile stretched just shy of warmth. "Talented Lady Wu," she says, "I hear you've been ... diligent." Wu bows low. "I live to serve, Your Majesty." A pause, then Empress Wang gestures to a scroll on the table. "Explain this. It's one of Wu's forgeries. How did it get here?" Your stomach knots. Even the mirror wouldn't have shown this. Wu rises slowly, looks at the scroll, looks at Wang, and instead of denying, she says, "That's not my ink. It's just ambiguous enough, just cold enough, just clever enough." The Empress's gaze narrows, then she laughs. "I do hope you're careful where you step, child." Wu nods, "As do I, Your Majesty." When she returns to her chamber that night, she burns half her scrolls, just the half that were meant to be found, and the other half, they're already where they need to be. By now, you've stopped trying to guess where Wu Zhao will lead you. Tonight, she walks not with purpose, but with stillness, letting her breath sink to the wind. There's something different in her gate lighter, like she's following a thread. Only she can feel. You trail her past a corridor painted with cloud dragons, down a forgotten stone stairway you've never noticed before. Lanterns hang here too, but none are lit. The air smells faintly of incense and mold. She stops before the base of the ancient bronze bell tower. The tower isn't used anymore, not for its intended purpose, anyway. Time was, it rang for war, weddings, eclipses. Now, it simply broods, its mouth sealed with iron ivy. No one comes here, except Wu. She places a palm against one of the weathered lion panels, presses hard. Something clicks. A section of the tower wall swings open. Silent as breath, and you both descend. You don't expect there to be stairs, or the smell of polished wood, or scrolls, dozens of them lined along narrow alcoves carved into the stone walls. It's not a tomb, It's a mind. Wu lights a single taper. The flame reflects in the eyes of the only other person in the room. A man, not a guard. Not a minister. A monk. Or rather, a former one. His robes are plain, not imperial issue. His head is shaven. His hands are stained with calligraphy ink. And his eyes, oh, those eyes hold more stories than the library upstairs. He smiles when he sees Wu. You're late. Wu smirks. You're early. You suddenly feel like an intruder. This man, known only as Shen, once served in the imperial archives. Some say he was banished for writing a heretical commentary on Confucian loyalty. Others claim he survived an assassination attempt meant for his patron and fled into religious seclusion. But here he is, under the bell tower, keeping secrets. On scrolls and in memory. He unfurls a document between them. You lean in. It's a coded account of military deployments along the Western Front, marked not by names, but by astrological constellations. Clever, layered, lethal. If it falls into the wrong hands, Wu studies it. Frowns, points to a symbol near the edge. They're shifting the northern troops. Shen nods. It's meant to look like a reality for harvest protection. But in truth, they're circling the capital. You feel the shift in her body. Calm, cold. She already knows what this means. The Emperor's health is failing, and the vultures are circling. A new heir is being chosen, quietly, perhaps without the Emperor's full awareness. A coup in everything but name. Wu doesn't tremble. She rolls up the scroll, ties it with red silk, and seals it with wax from Shen's lamp. How many allies do we have left? She asks. Fewer than we did, Shen answers. Still enough for a fire. Wu smiles again, and then you hear it. A bell, not the bronze one above your head, long silenced, but a soft bell inside the room, a wind chime tied to a string near the far wall. It rings once, twice, thrice. Someone else is coming. Wu douses the taper. You all vanish into the walls. A shadow passes the threshold. The chime stills. You hear the rustle of silk, a whisper of breath, and then nothing. Later, when you climb back into the safety of the corridor above, Wu says nothing. But she doesn't head back to her chambers. Not yet. Instead, she detours to the moon viewing platform. There, she sits alone for a long time, the city of Chang'an unfurling beneath her like a scroll of stars. You sit with her, and she begins to speak. There are 5 types of silence, she murmurs. The one before power, the one during betrayal, the one after blood, the one in waiting, and the one no one hears because it's inside the mind of a woman who already knows she'll win. You shiver because she's not speaking to herself. She's speaking to you. You wonder if she knows you're here. She continues. The Emperor's body is breaking. He knows it. So do his sons. But none of them know who they fear more, each other or me. You think of Shen, of the secret scrolls, of the echoing silence under the bell tower. Do you ask? Fear, she says. She turns to you. Her eyes gleam not with madness, but with certainty. I stopped fearing anything the day I realized my name would outlive theirs. The next day, the Emperor fails to attend court. By evening, the palace is buzzing. Rumors of illness. Some whisper poison. Others say he's in meditation. But you know better. Wu spends the day in her chambers, quietly sewing a red sash. That night, the sash is tied to a branch in the garden where the Emperor once fed his peacocks. The birds ignore it, but the eunuchs do not. The sash means he may die soon, and I am ready. It's not a declaration. It's a warning, and beneath the bronze bell, you can already hear the first crack in the empire's foundation. You don't notice her crying at first. Wu is seated in her private study, hunched slightly over a small cedarwood altar, the flickering lamplight casting long shadows across the painted floor tiles. Her hair is unbounded round. Her face is bare. No rouge, no powder. A single bracelet of jade clinks gently as her fingers tremble. Atop the altar, a small bundle of silk, tightly swaddled. Too small to be anything but what you think it is. She's been sitting like this. For hours the silence feels suffocating. Then she speaks not to you, not even to herself, but in the way people talk when they don't expect an answer. I never named her. You feel your chest tighten. She never had time for a name. The bundle doesn't move, and the silence gets deeper. Later, the court will call it a tragic loss, a sudden fever, or perhaps malnutrition. No one will say what really happened, and Wu herself will never correct them. Why would she? That would require giving voice to something too sharp, too strange, because you've seen the baby before, just once. Nestled in a bamboo cradle in the upper women's quarters, guarded by a mute wet nurse and watched over by two suspicious concubines. She was tiny, soft-skinned, and eerily quiet. But her eyes, those dark eyes, looked just like her mother's. And now she's gone, but not from illness, no. The whispers are starting already. Empress Wang had visited Wu's rooms that very morning, trailing attendants who left powdered footprints. On the floor, the same day, Wu stepped away from the nursery for less than an hour, called away to settle a dispute over who had stolen a pearl hairpin. When she returned, the baby was pale. Still warm, the wet nurse was sobbing and saying nothing. That's when Wu stopped speaking, too. She didn't accuse, didn't scream, didn't cry in front of the others. She just changed. Her movements became slower, her voice quieter, her smiles more exact. And she started to write names, dozens of names on tiny slips of silk, which she tucked into a lacquered chest beneath her floorboards. You saw her add another one tonight. Wang, she whispers, and Liu, concubine Liu, the emperor's newest favorite, had grown especially interested in Wu's child in recent weeks. So pretty, she'd said with a soft coo. But will she live long enough to become competition? It had sounded like a joke. Wu had laughed now. Her mouth is a thin, bloodless line that night. A eunuch arrives, bearing a formal invitation from Empress Wang'an. Evening of poetry and song in the upper pavilion. An olive branch. A dare. A test. Wu accepts with a smile that doesn't reach her eyes. You accompany her. The upper pavilion is all lanterns and lilting music. Peony wine flows like silk. Painted courtesans dance barefoot on silk carpets. It should be beautiful, but something is wrong. You notice it in the way Wang sits, just a little too tall, sipping her wine without touching her lips to the cup. The way concubine Liu watches Wu's every move, pretending not to. The laughter is brittle, and each poem seems to hold more barbs than beauty. Empress Wang calls on Wu to recite something. Wu steps forward with a gracious bow and begins, in a garden thick with plum blossoms. One petal drifts too soon, crushed beneath jealous shoes. It stains the earth forever. Silence. The courtesans freeze. Wang lifts her cup slowly. How sad, she says. But the tree survives. No, Wu smiles until the roots rot. You almost choke on your tea. Liu laughs nervously. That night, Wu returns to her chamber and begins preparing something you've never seen. Her touch before, her ceremonial mourning robes, not black dot red dot, blood-red silk, embroidered with silver dragons and paired with a sash the color of old fire. She lays them out across her bed, and you realize this is not mourning. It's war paint the next day. The emperor calls for her. Alone, he doesn't mention the child, doesn't ask about the pavilion. Instead, he compliments her insight into recent tax reforms, her calming presence at court, her intelligence. He strokes her hand and asks, "Do you still weep?" Wu looks him in the eye, only when it's useful. Historians still argue whether the emperor suspected anything whether. He knew Wu blamed his wife and favorite for the baby's death. Some think he did and looked the other way. Others say he believed Wu had simply accepted the tragedy with grace. You suspect he never really wanted to know, because 3 weeks later, Empress Wang and concubine Liu are both accused of witchcraft, in a sealed scroll sent by an anonymous hand, bearing the seal of a high-ranking eunuch, who's suddenly nowhere to be found. The emperor reads a tale of spell puppets, poisoned talismans, and secret rites performed in the women's quarters. And in this tale, both women are implicated. Wang is furious. Liu sobs, but neither can explain the incense stains found on their brushes, the carved figurines hidden beneath their mattresses, or the odd substances discovered in their footbaths. And Wu, she weeps softly, perfectly, as if she's still broken by the end of the month. Both women are stripped of rank and placed under house arrest in separate wings of the palace. Their supporters fall silent, their attendants vanish, and the emperor's attentions turn fully to Wu. She doesn't smile as much these days, but when she does, it's like the moment before a blade is drawn. You wake to bells small, sharp, insistent, not the temple kind, but the warning kind. The kind that means someone important is coming, and everything better sparkle like heaven by the time they arrive. You throw on robes and step out just in time to see a cluster of eunuchs hustling through the corridor, their shoes whispering against the polished wood. Their voices are hushed, but the message is clear. Wu is moving, not leaving the palace. No, she's merely shifting quarters. But in the inner court, a change of room isn't just about feng shui. It's a chess move. And Wu, she's not just changing rooms, she's stepping into Empress Wang's former quarters. You trail the procession silently, half watching, half stunned. The rooms Wang once inhabited were the finest in the inner court, lacquered walls, gold-threaded hangings, and a view of the south gardens, the emperor's favorite. No concubine has occupied these chambers in decades. They're reserved for the empress, or someone dangerously close. Wu's silk train whispers across the stones like a secret. Inside, incense is already burning, gardenia and sandalwood. Her belongings arrive one by one. A bronze mirror, a jade comb, scrolls of poetry in her own careful script. But there's one item that doesn't belong. An old hairpin made of plain bone. You remember it. It used to belong to Wang Dot. Wu places it gently atop her altar, and then smiles. In the days that follow, everything shifts. Ministers who once bowed only perfunctorily now linger, asking after her health. Temple priests request her blessing for rituals. Even the emperor's mother, who has never approved of Wu, begins sending small gifts, dried dates, healing teas, rare scrolls. Wu responds with warm calligraphy and deeper curtsies. But you notice she never touches the dates. She's clever, you think, but not just clever. She's something else now. like she's playing a game everyone else is too polite to admit exists. The emperor begins to dine with her almost nightly. You watch them from behind the screen: roast duck, lotus root, and wine. Wu pours his cup herself. Always the right temperature, the perfect measure. She never speaks too loudly, never contradicts him, never even finishes her thoughts. She lets him do that, makes him feel clever, and yet, somehow, she leads every conversation. One evening, as a servant spills hot tea near her sleeve, she doesn't flinch. She simply holds out her hand and says, "Pain teaches us precision." The room goes quiet. The emperor is silent for a moment too long, then nods. "Very true." Later, as you help her undress, you see the red mark where the tea struck. Already blistering, she doesn't wince. Historians still argue whether Wu was manipulating the emperor with seduction, intelligence, or pure survival instinct. But watching her now, you think, why not all three? Survival isn't a single instinct. It's a tapestry. She's weaving it beautifully, still. Not everyone is pleased. A noble consort lady, cousin to a northern general, attempts to challenge Wu's influence during a court banquet. She jokes too loudly about how Wu seems to be picking out curtains more suited to an empress than a concubine. Laughter follows. Nervous, but real. Wu doesn't blink. She pours Lady May a fresh cup of wine and says, "Curtains matter less than windows. It's what you see from your place that defines it." Lady May sips. 3 days later, Lady May is confined to her quarters with a mysterious rash that refuses to respond to herbal treatments. Doctors debate whether it's a reaction to ink powder or imported perfume. Wu sends her a poem. The blossom withers, yet no one asks why, too afraid to name the wind. The emperor, meanwhile, continues to drift toward her orbit, like a fish drawn to deeper waters. He begins calling her Zhao Yi, a formal promotion, making her the highest-ranking concubine, only one step below empress. And that's when the court explodes. Petitions arrive in waves. Senior officials warn against elevating someone of such low birth. Monks argue the omens are bad. A pair of astrologers are so dramatic about it, they stage a public fast. You watch Wu read the petitions in silence. She fans herself with a peacock feather and says, "If the stars dislike me, they can send better letters." You laugh. You can't help it, but her face never breaks. Then the emperor takes her on a rare public outing, a visit to the Temple of Auspicious Peace, in a gilded palanquin. With her name announced by trumpets, she steps out before the people, and they stare. She's radiant, dressed in crimson and pearl. She walks like someone who already owns everything she sees. But it's not vanity, it's something colder, sharper, like she's testing the ground with every step. And the people, they don't cheer, but they don't boo either. They watch. They remember the eunuch's whisper. She has made herself unforgettable. You notice something else, too. A group of women commoners cluster at the temple gate. One of them, older, with calloused hands and a face weathered by river wind, bows deeply. Wu bows back. Later, in her carriage, you ask if she knew the woman. "No," she says, "but I will, and you understand. She's not just building power. In the court, she's building memory, legacy, fear, and admiration." One morning, as you sweep the stones outside her chamber, you hear her murmuring, "Not yet, but soon." She's holding the old bone hairpin again, and she's smiling. You kneel to adjust the hem of her robe and catch a whisper from behind the lacquered screen. A minister's voice. low and anxious, saying something about dreams and omens. Wu Zetian is sitting with her tea, looking unbothered. The court, on the other hand, is on fire. The emperor's health has begun to falter, not gravely, not yet, but enough to make the senior ministers exchange glances at meetings, enough for whispers about succession to drift like incense down the corridors. And of course, the moment the emperor sneezes, every faction that ever felt threatened by Wu Zetian tries to claw its way forward. The empress, still technically empress, Wang, begins to reappear at public rituals. Her silks grow more elaborate, her offerings at temple more expensive. A week later, consort Xiao donates an entire bronze bell to the shrine at Mount Tai, claiming it was on behalf of the emperor's good health. Wu Zetian, watching from the side, simply nods. You offer her wine one night and ask if she's worried. She doesn't answer immediately. Then, softly, let them make noise. Thunder only matters if it strikes. And then she returns to writing. Always writing, letters, scrolls, poems, lists. You once peeked over her shoulder and saw what looked like a plan. Names of ministers, family connections, childhood tutors, even the birthplaces of their wives. The kind of information no concubine should have. Knowledge is armor, she says. When you're bold enough to ask, but knowledge, it turns out, isn't enough. A scandal breaks. Historians still debate who started it. Some say a jealous concubine. Others blame an ambitious eunuch angling for promotion. But what matters is the accusation that Wu Zetian used dark spells to weaken the emperor and hex his other wives. Witchcraft, always the go-to, when a woman has too much power and too few. Friends, a search is ordered. Dozens of palace attendants are interrogated. Herbal jars smashed. A Taoist priest is summoned to purify the quarters with smoke and bells. You remember hiding the bone hairpin. Wu doesn't flinch. She kneels in silence as they sift through her belongings, overturning silks and pulling scrolls from beneath. The bed, when they find the ink drawing she made of a coiling dragon in lotus flames, they gasp, claim it's an occult diagram. Wu tilts her head and says, it's a metaphor. The emperor, tired, pale, thinner than you've ever seen, calls a halt to the search. She is no witch, he says flatly. But he doesn't sound entirely sure. You help her dress the next morning and notice the faint tremble in her fingers. She meets your gaze in the bronze mirror and murmurs, they're testing how far I can bend before I snap. She doesn't snap. Instead, she changes tactics. She begins hosting salons quiet, late-night gatherings of scholars, poets, astrologers, and lesser wives. No politics on the surface, just tea, music, verses exchanged like gossip. But you see, the undercurrent. Wu listens more than she speaks. She learns who is secretly married to whom, who gambles, who reads banned texts. Every person who sips her plum wine walks away feeling heard and watched. One night, she invites a young Taoist monk named Lu Shen, charismatic, mystical, rumored to talk with fox spirits. He reads the patterns in her tea leaves and says, you were born beneath the purple star. A hush falls. The purple stars weighs, the symbol of imperial fate. A star only destined for emperors or empresses. People begin whispering that she's heaven-touched. Not a witch but chosen. The empress, desperate now, retaliates. She accidentally invites Wu to attend a prayer ceremony where the incense smoke is so strong. Several women faint. Wu stays standing. Barely you catch her coughing blood. That night, She refuses to see the court physician. Instead, she prepares her own remedy, some concoction of mountain bark, pickled lizard, and dried chrysanthemum. Tastes like punishment. She drinks it anyway. I trust no one to save me more than myself. The emperor recovers briefly and, perhaps out of guilt, begins drafting an edict to make Wu Zetian the official empress. His mother storms from the chamber. Ministers shout. Monks wail that the heavens will collapse. He doesn't sign it yet, but something is shifting. The bone hairpin sits openly on Wu's altar now. No longer a secret, a symbol. One night she brings you close and whispers, I won't be remembered for being beloved. I'll be remembered for being impossible to erase. And the next morning, she requests that a portrait be commissioned, not for the emperor's gallery. For the main shrine in the women's quarters, it shows her standing under a crimson parasol, one hand raised in blessing, the other cradling a scroll. Behind her, peonies and dragons. You help hang it. A minor courtier makes a comment about it, being presumptuous. 2 weeks later, he's reassigned to a remote outpost where the only audience is YAKS. By the end of that summer, her enemies have been quieted, not all vanished, but cautious. Some scholars suggest it was through poison. Others say blackmail. Wu never confirms either. You suspect the real weapon was simply patience. Patience wrapped in silk and dipped in poetry. One day, she sits by the fish pond and watches the koi circle. Do you think they know the walls are glass? She asks you. You don't answer. She already knows the answer, and so do you. There's a silence that hangs over the palace when someone is dying. It's not loud or theatrical lights in the way the birds stop singing in the inner courtyards, the way footsteps soften on the jade paths. You notice it first in the kitchens, when soup bowls go untouched. Then among the scribes, writing less, waiting more. The emperor is fading. You're by Wu Zetian's side when the news comes. A messenger, eyes red from running, Neil's forehead pressed to the floor. He will not see another winter. She doesn't blink. She only says, then let us begin the preparations. Preparations for what, exactly? You dare not ask. But the palace already knows. Empress Wang tries to reclaim favor in the last weeks. She sits vigil, reciting Buddhist sutras for the emperor's health. Her hands tremble with the beads. Consort Shao sends rare ginseng from the southern provinces. But the emperor barely opens his eyes now. It's Wu Zetian who bathes his forehead in jasmine water. Wu Hu arranges the calligraphy brush in his dying hand. Wu Hu composes the final poem he can no longer write. And one morning, before the sun breaks fully, he is gone. You feel it in your chest before the palace bell tolls. Wu Zetian sits by the window, dressed not in black, but moonlight white. She already looks like a widow carved from pearl. She gazes at the horizon as though she'd seen this coming long before you were even born. But grief isn't what she wears. It's resolve. Now the air sharpens. A new game has begun. The emperor had sons, several. But the heir, a boy of 17, is weak, pliable, more interested in painting ducks than in court. That's exactly why Wu Zetian supported him. Behind the scrolls and ceremony, everyone knows the power behind the throne will be hers, unless the Dowager Empress, the emperor's mother, stops her, and she tries hard. Suddenly, a scroll surfaces, an imperial order allegedly written before the emperor's death, declaring that Wu must retire to a convent as tradition demands of imperial widows. Historians still argue whether the order was forged. The ink was dry. The seal was real, but the tone oddly passive. Wu Zetian reads it in public, in front of ministers, her face unreadable. Then, slowly, she lifts the scroll to a nearby candle and burns it, page by page, letting the ash fall into her tea. The emperor made many drafts, she says softly, but only one truth. Some gasp, others bow, and some begin planning. You don't sleep much during those weeks. Rumors fly like crows over the rooftops. Some say a guard tried to poison her porridge. Others whisper of a young scribe who vanished after transcribing a decree. You never know what's true, but you keep the dagger under your pillow. You also keep watching the koi pond. Wu does too. The fish still circle, always circling. The coronation of the young emperor happens in a muted ceremony. Wu Zetian is officially just Empress Dowager now. But at court, he never speaks unless she nods first. His first 5 decrees are drafted in her handwriting. His seal, when affixed, always SMUDGES. Ministers pretend not to notice. Then comes the coup attempt. A group of noble families' old bloodlines, men with ancestral names that reach back to before the Tang rises up in protest. They claim Wu's influence is immoral, that the emperor's soul is being clouded by feminine corruption. One even says, in court, he is no more than her puppet. Wu Zetian smiles. She replies, then let's make sure the puppet dances well. The conspirators are arrested at night. No blood, no riots. Just a series of quiet knocks on polished doors. Scrolls unrolling with lists of names. Silk cords waiting in the dark. One noble is offered the chance to take poison in his bath. He does. His wife later donates the tub to a temple. You remember, helping Wu dress the morning after, her hair lacquered and wound high. Her robes imperial yellow, a shade no woman has worn since the Han Dynasty. She looks at herself in the mirror and says, I'm tired of borrowing power. Let's wear it. That day, she appears in court beside the emperor. Not behind him, not beside him, above him. The court gasps. She doesn't sit on the dragon throne. Not yet, but the message is clear. From then on, ministers begin addressing their memorials not just to the emperor, but to the 2 sovereigns. It's unprecedented. It's blasphemy. It's brilliant. And as the court reels, she institutes sweeping changes. Paper becomes the official medium of all edicts, ending the dominance of silk scrolls. Symbolic gesture, but a powerful one. Paper, cheaper and more accessible, opens the bureaucracy to lower-born scholars. Suddenly, talent matters more than family. She commissions a new department, the Office of Anonymous Petitions. Anyone, even a peasant, can submit a sealed note, accusing a corrupt official. Ministers start trembling at market stalls. Fringe tidbit. She hires an all-female secretarial corps, young widows trained in shorthand mathematics and poetry. They wear indigo uniforms and carry daggers. The palace calls them the Blue Shadows. You once watched them move like a tide through the library wing, rearranging entire cabinets of tax records in a single afternoon, and still, the old elite resist. Another accusation is leveled this time, that she's violating yin-yang harmony, upending the cosmic balance by being a woman at the center of state. She laughs, then invites the accuser to publicly demonstrate his harmony with the cosmos. He declines. The emperor, meanwhile, grows quieter, more withdrawn. Some say he spends his nights painting alone. Others whisper that he's fallen ill again, but no one talks openly. The silence is thick now. It clings to the rafters. One night, Wu Zetian finds you in the archives, staring at a wall of ancestral charts. She places a hand on your shoulder. "I don't believe in destiny," she says, "only momentum." And in the mirror behind her, you see it, the first flicker of what comes next. She is done pulling strings behind a curtain. She is ready to break the stage. It's past midnight when she finally says it aloud. "I will be emperor, not empress, not regent, not dowager, emperor." The word slips into the air like oil into water, spreading, darkening everything around it. You feel your lungs tightened like you're breathing in something forbidden. No woman has ever claimed that title in her own right in all of Chinese history. None, ever. And yet, here you are, looking at Wu Zetian's calm, deliberate face as she lifts her brush and begins drafting the first in a new series of imperial edicts. They no longer carry the boy emperor's name. They carry hers. The boy, her son, is still alive, still nominally in power, but he's pale, often absent. He speaks in whispers, if at all. Some say he's been poisoned slowly. Others insist he's chosen silence to avoid being part of the machinery his mother is assembling. Historians still argue whether he resigned willingly or simply became too irrelevant to matter. Either way, he's no longer issuing orders. She is. You follow her across a year of subtle transformations. The banners shift first, no longer adorned only with dragons, but phoenixes, symbols of rebirth, but also of fierce feminine power. The court's language shifts next. Scholars begin referring to the sacred majesty, a term not gendered, yet unmistakably hers. You watch officials squirm, trying to figure out what to call her in official petitions. Some write Holy Sovereign, others revert to your radiance. One bold man calls her Son of Heaven and receives a new robe, sewn inside out. Everything is being restructured. You feel the ground tilt beneath you. Departments merge and fracture. Ministers are suddenly promoted or demoted by midnight decree. A famous general is sent north without warning. The next day, his lands are absorbed into a new province carved by Wu's order, and the temples they begin to whisper, too. Some Buddhist monks declare her the reincarnation of Maitreya, the future Buddha who will bring peace and justice to the world. Others protest loudly, invoking ancient doctrines about the cosmic balance of male and female. Wu simply smiles and increases the endowments to the monasteries that side with her. Then she does something bolder. She funds the printing of a new sutra Buddhist text in which a female monarch brings divine order to a fractured world. It's distributed across the realm. School children memorize it. Temple walls are painted with her likeness, stylized in flowing golden robes, one hand raised in blessing, the other holding the law. You watch as her image shifts from human ruler to almost divine presence. Behind the scenes, she's building a new mythology, one where her rise isn't scandalous or aberrant, but fated, even sacred. And you carry these scrolls to secret reading rooms. You translate imperial edicts into the vulgar tongue so they can be proclaimed in village squares. You begin to forget what it felt like before all this, before her shadow stretched across the empire like dawn, and then just when it seems, stable trouble arrives from the provinces. A governor in the west refuses to obey an imperial summons. His excuse: "My orders come from the emperor, not from a woman." Classic, predictable, fatal. Wu sends her blue shadows to escort him to the capital. He resists. They don't return. Instead, A courier arrives with a severed braid of hair and a ring bearing the imperial seal. Nothing else. Wu reads the message in silence. Then, for the first time in months, you see her angry. Not theatrical anger, not courtly outrage, quiet seething fury. She sends an army, not one commanded by a male general. No, she chooses a young female strategist trained in the newly formed Imperial Military Academy, one of Wu's own creations. Let her prove that women can wield swords as well as pens, Wu says. The army departs under banners of crimson and gold. They return 3 months later with the governor in chains and the rebel prefecture renamed. You watch the procession enter the capital. The strategist barely 20 rides at the front, chin high. Behind her, the blue shadows. Behind them, captured banners, inverted. It is not just a military victory. It's a public rewriting of what power looks like. Fringe detail, the strategist's name, Ju An, her reward. A scroll bearing a single line in Wu's handwriting. The phoenix does not ask permission from the dragon. The scholar class recoils. The court poets write verses comparing Wu to mythical empresses. Lost to time, some say she channels Fu Hao, the Shang general queen. Others invoke the Queen Mother of the West. Wu lets the rumors grow, and then she takes the final step. In an unprecedented ceremony, she orders the forging of a new imperial seal knot, the traditional jade square used by male rulers. But a circular disc carved from obsidian, wrapped in gold filigree. The inscription reads, Shao Tianzian, daughter of heaven. She holds it aloft before the court, and no one speaks. Not even the boy emperor, now barely seen at all, kept in a wing of the palace so quiet that birds sometimes nest in the courtyard lanterns. From that moment on, documents bear her name, her seal. She signs as Huangdi, emperor, not empress. Not dowager, not consort, Emperor Wu, you. Feel history quake beneath your feet. Historians still argue whether this moment marked the true start of her reign or if it began long before, in the shadowed corridors of her concubine days. But for the people, the change is immediate. Coins are minted with her profile. Statues erected in city gates. In the provinces, farmers offer prayers to her alongside the harvest gods. Some even hang talismans bearing her calligraphy over their doors to ward off drought and misfortune. And the court, they scramble to adapt. One minister collapses mid-petition, another flees to the mountains, claiming he had a vision of the world turned upside down. You hear a eunuch joke quietly, too quietly that next she'll be walking on water. But you know better. She isn't interested in miracles. She's interested in permanence. That night, under heavy skies, you pass her chamber through the silk curtains. You see her writing, still by candlelight, plotting, planning, etching her legacy one brushstroke at a time. You hear her murmur, let them forget how this began, but not how it ends. And you feel the chill settle into your bones, because this is only halfway. The sound of bells wakes you, not the pleasant clink of temple chimes or the heavy clang of war gongs. This is sharper, urgent. The inner court is already in motion, embroidered slippers hurrying across stone, whispers bouncing from pillar to pillar. You rise, robe half fastened, and catch the edge of the announcement as it echoes down the corridor. The boy emperor is dead. No ceremony, no imperial decree, no imperial mourning yet. Just those 4 words floating heavy in the morning. Haze. You already know better than to ask how. You wait, and sure enough, by sundown, the official edict arrives, not in the trembling voice of a child emperor, but in Wu Zetian's serene, measured tones. The emperor, Zhongzong, taken by illness, has ascended to the ancestral realm. Of course, you watch the court file in for ritual mourning, all in ash-grey robes, but no one wails. There are no drums. The rituals feel like formality, like everyone already mourned him long ago, when he was silenced in everything but name. The throne is vacant, and then, a day later, no longer. Wu Zetian ascends it herself. No regency, no puppet, no pretense. The coronation happens in the Hall of Supreme Harmony, beneath gold-lacquered dragons and thunderclouds so heavy the sky practically hisses. You stand just beyond the edge of the ceremony, among clerks and chambermaids and guards, who have all forgotten how to breathe. She wears crimson robes lined with sable and phoenix feathers. Her crown holds 12 pearl strands, each said to represent a celestial virtue. When she turns her head, the pearls swing like pendulums, measuring the downfall of a dynasty, because, officially, she does more than take power. She declares the beginning of a new era. Temps is over, Zhou is born. Yes, she revives an ancient dynasty name, one unused for centuries, and makes it hers. The Tang Dynasty, her husband's family, is folded like old paper and tucked away. She says it's symbolic, a renewal. Historians still argue whether it was meant as revenge, rebirth, or simply a way to cut the last cords tying her to the men who once ruled over her. The new dynasty's name is etched into stone across the empire. The era changes. Calendars are reprinted. Even the stars seem to tilt in her favor. An eclipse arrives weeks later, and the imperial astronomers, conveniently, declare it a heavenly seal affirming her mandate. You look at her face in the days after her coronation and notice it has changed. Not aged, no. She still moves with precision, her spine like an iron ruler, but quieted. There's a stillness in her now, as if she's reached a mountaintop no one thought she could climb, and found that the wind is very cold up there. Still, she doesn't rest. She builds. A bureau of secretaries is expanded, with women now permitted to serve as scribes, editors, even censors. She appoints the first female chancellor, an aged poetess who once taught her the classics in her concubine days. That woman's first act, banning officials from using he or she in imperial correspondence. From now on, they will refer to the sovereign, and let grammar bend around it. She designs a new capital. Luoyang Chang'an remains, but she shifts the seat of power eastward. Historians still debate whether this was a move of spiritual feng shui or practical politics. Either way, it works. You walk the streets of the new capital ordered, precise, draped in crimson banners. There's a strange blend of terror and awe among the people. Vendors whisper about her immortal doctors. Students recite poems praising the mother emperor who rose like dawn. Farmers tell stories of how the fields grew fuller under her reign. Fringe detail. One storyteller insists that Wu's breath turned a locust swarm into butterflies. Another claims she travels by night on a black palanquin, borne by blind eunuchs who speak only in birdsong. It's nonsense, of course. Probably, but you notice. No one dares correct them. Meanwhile, her enemies retreat underground. The Confucians, especially, they hate her. They call her unnatural, a distortion of cosmic order. One senior scholar foolishly sends her a scroll comparing her to a poisonous flower that blooms only in cursed soil. She returns it, annotated, in her own hand. Underneath his metaphor, she writes, Even cursed soil grows roots, and you have never bloomed. The scholar retires 3 days later, and then comes the poetry. Wu commissions a series of anthologies poems by women, about women. Some are verses by palace attendants, others are ancient works she unearthed and restored. She even contributes her own, published anonymously, but everyone knows, you know. One poem in particular spreads like wildfire. I was not born to weave and wait. I was born to name the stars. It's recited in marketplaces, whispered in tea houses, scratched onto the backs of clay tiles by students who will never see the court. Even her critics admit she reshapes the very idea of rule, not by wielding swords, but by rewriting the language. Still, not everyone is pleased. A conspiracy forms in the northern provinces, led by aristocrats who resent her new tax reform's wealth redistribution. Land audits, the elimination of inherited fief. They claim to be restoring the tanks. A few mutter, more boldly now, that a woman cannot truly hold the mandate of heaven. Wu doesn't flinch. She sends a decree to each rebel noble. Return to loyalty, and I forget your name. Persist in treason, and I erase your family's bones. No metaphors this time. The rebellion dies in silence. You wonder if she feels anything, any more guilt, regret, fear. If she dreams of the corridors where she once served tea as a trembling concubine. But if she does, she never lets it show. At night, you sometimes pass her balcony and see her gazing at the moon. Alone, no music, no incense, just the soft crackle of the lantern beside her, and the silence of someone who has climbed beyond loneliness. And one evening, she says, without turning her head, even the stars are shaped by pressure. You realize she's not talking to herself. She's talking to you, because she knows. She always knows. You think you've seen power before, but not like this. Wu Zetian, now emperor in title and reality, rules not beside a man, nor in his absence, but instead of one. The court bows fully to her. The rituals are adjusted to account for a woman as son of heaven. And still, every time she enters the hall of dazzling clarity, you feel the breath in your chest stutter, as if the room itself can't quite catch up to the history being rewritten before its eyes. By now, the emperor's crimson slippers are the only sound you recognize in your sleep. But power, you quickly learn, does not just mean authority. It means attention, and attention. It's dangerous. The inner court begins to ripple with new dangers, quiet and coiled. Spy masters, who once whispered only in shadows, now pass scrolls across wide tables. Eunuchs shift loyalties faster than fish dart through lotus ponds. Every servant's eye might be a mirror, every flute player a message runner, every silk fan hiding a name. You learn the palace has a new phrase. Sheng Mutian Zai, Holy Mother, Son of Heaven. It's said with admiration and fear, and in the middle of it all, a puzzle. Wu's sons. Ah, yes. The ones left alive. Remember, she had 4. One was exiled. One she allegedly had poisoned. The other 2, the ones still breathing, are now awkwardly placed. They hold titles. They host ceremonies. But they walk like shadows behind her throne. Take Li Dan, the quieter one. Scholars say he's pious, soft-spoken, a man who would rather compose verses than govern. You've seen him. In the imperial library, his fingertips dusted with ash from old scrolls. He rarely speaks, but when he does, his voice is wind chime light. No threat to her. But Li Shana, he's different. Clever, handsome, charismatic in that way. that makes statues jealous. He plays the role of dutiful son, but not all the time, and not convincingly. One day, a letter surfaces, anonymous, handwritten. It accuses Li Shan of plotting with court astrologers to predict the downfall of the current reign star, a veiled insult to the empress herself. Historians still argue whether the letter was real or a planted warning. Either way, the result is the same. Wu Zetian invites her son to dine with her. Just the two of them. Private quarters, sweet wine, poetry about filial piety. And then, calmly, almost as if discussing the weather, she accuses him of treason. He denies it. He weeps. She listens, then has him arrested. Later, the astrologer is found with his tongue removed. Li Shan, he retires to an elegant estate in the south, with guards and walls, and no horses. You see how the empress doesn't flinch. Not once. Her hands pour tea the same way they always have, 3 drops from the height of her wrist. But you remember her eyes. After he leaves, the way they linger on the incense smoke a moment too long, the slight tremor when she sets the cup down. Even when she wins, she bleeds. The court, of course, adjusts. Officials begin praising her divine instincts. Scrolls circulate comparing her to the mythical Yellow Emperor. A few too bold flatterers start calling her Sheng Shou, sacred hands. One even goes as far as to claim that her very handwriting cures fevers. That one is immediately promoted. Still, the descent doesn't die, it just changes color. You start noticing an uptick in anonymous poetry. Little verses scratched into stair railings or left folded beneath peach bowls in the kitchens. They call her a tyrant in rhyme. One refers to her as the viper mother, who eats her own tail. Another likens her to a mirror beautiful, but filled only with her own reflection. One morning, you hear of an incident in the gardens. A plum tree uprooted, its trunk carved with a message. The mandate is borrowed, not stolen. Wu doesn't comment, doesn't flinch, but she does tighten the lattice of spies. Suddenly, the Bureau of Punishments is filled with new faces. Torturers in embroidered masks, secretaries who record every confession in blue ink on black parchment. You hear whispers of the Iron Circle, a hidden chamber beneath the palace where traitors vanish for days. Then there's the rumor about the birds. Apparently, trained minas roam the courtyards, listening, repeating phrases. Long live the Empress, they chirp. Death to the Thames, they trill. But if one bird repeats something less loyal, the handler is never seen again. You doubt the story, until one day you pass a cage in the treasury, and the bird inside cocks its head at you and says, in perfect cadence, she sees your thoughts. You walk faster after that. One particularly odd fringe detail emerges during this era. Wu begins construction on an enormous stele, a colossal stone tablet taller than 3 elephants, polished to a mirror sheen. But when it's unveiled, you notice something odd. There's no inscription, not a single word. The stone is blank. Officials bow before it anyway, whispering phrases of reverence. Why? Historians still debate. Some say she left it blank so future generations could write her legacy. Others believe it was a silent dare, that no one was worthy of etching her story. Or, perhaps, it was simply a mirrorment to reflect the viewer's own ambition back at them. She doesn't explain, she never does, but you notice that anyone who stands too long in front of that blank stele always walks away, change quieter, more thoughtful, less certain of themselves. like the stone, said something. The Empress herself. She seems untouched. She still wakes before dawn, receives memorials, issues edicts. Her hair, silver-threaded now, is always immaculately styled. Her dragon seal is passed to ministers with a flick of the wrist. But behind her eyes, you start to notice calculation becoming caution. She knows time is catching up. She knows the pressure of the throne. And she knows more than anyone that even gods need allies, or else they fall. You wake to the scent of camellia oil and old incense. But there's something else in the air. Naus, something metallic, like the breath before a thunderstorm. Wu Zetian is aging. You see it in the curve of her shoulders, once steel, now softening. You hear it in the shift of her voice, less whip, more whisper. Even emperors must face the dusk, but the court is not easing with her, if anything. The sharks are circling. Her once loyal advisors begin acting strangely. Memorials to the throne multiply, each one more sycophantic than the last. Ministers outbid one another in ceremonies of devotion. One even builds a miniature temple in her honor, staffed with golden-robed monks chanting her name. Nice touch, until the monks forget to mention her ancestor's name in the prayers. He disappears. The temple burns mysteriously 3 days later. Even in her twilight, Wu Zetian does not blink. Still, she knows what's coming. She needs a successor. But which son? Li Dan, the bookish one, still walks like his feet aren't sure they belong to him. He reads sutras, paints cranes, avoids direct questions. But perhaps that's his strength. He has no enemies. Or maybe that's the problem, he has no allies either. Then there's the ghost of Li Shan, the son she exiled, now grown into something harder. In the southern estate, he cultivates a quiet rebellion. Not open war, no, he's smarter than that. But the rumors, oh, they hiss through the court like smoke through a reed basket, that he still receives envoys, that he keeps a replica of the imperial seal under his pillow, that he has an astrologer of his own now. Historians still argue whether Wu ever considered recalling him. But something else distracts her. A new favorite. His name is Zhang Changzong. A beauty, really cheeks like rose petals, voice like a guqin string plucked in candlelight. He's single quotes as ... younger, a poet, and now her personal attendant. His brother, Zhang Yizi, is more the tactician, sharp-eyed, cool-mouthed, calculating. Behind his brother's silk-smooth charm, together they rise fast. Too fast you watch as they receive robes trimmed with imperial phoenixes and honor, once reserved for generals. They preside over court rituals, whisper in her ear during councils, pour her wine during evening audiences. And yes, they smile a lot. Some say Wu truly loves them, that they make her feel immortal. Others believe they're tools, no different. From swords or ink, brushes, shiny, pleasant, and discardable. Either way, the court hates them. And when the Empress falls, ill-favored, breath shallow, murmuring verses from the Book of Changes, the vultures do more than circle. They strike it. Happens just before dawn. You're awoken not by bells, but by silence. The palace is still, too still, then shouts, sandaled feet running. Guards rushing the central hall, it's the coup, officials. Many of them from powerful clans long suppressed by Wu, suddenly move with terrifying precision. They storm the palace gates, arrest the Zhang brothers before they can button their robes, and drag them barefoot, shrieking through the courtyards. You see it, Zhang Changzong, blood on his lip, tries to recite a poem. He's cut off, midline by a sword. Wu Zetian is too sick to rise. Her attendants beg for a physician. The court sends one who declares she is unfit to rule. It's over, but it isn't brutal. Not in the way you'd expect. No public execution. Number heads on pikes. Instead, she is invited to step down. A quiet word, a respectful bow. An imperial edict, already drafted and signed with her trembling hand. She reads it once. Her eyes skim past the titles. The flourishes dot. Then she sets it down and nods. You expect rage, resistance, a single cutting insult. Instead, she says nothing. She folds her hands. She walks back to her quarters the next day. Li Dan is declared emperor. Not as Tang Zhongzong or Tang Gaozong II, just Tang. The Wu interlude is to be quietly erased, rewritten, smoothed over like clay under wet fingers. The stele in the garden, still blank. No one dares inscribe it now. You hear whispers that Li Dan sends her gifts, food, music, her favorite calligraphy brushes, but she no longer holds court, no longer gives commands. She simply waits. Some say she spends her days in a round tower, gazing into a mirror that once belonged to the Sui dynasty. Others claim she takes up painting again, using only black ink on rice paper, drawing crows, not phoenixes. And the rest, they forget her, or pretend to. History begins the cleanup. Court poets are summoned to compose elegies that subtly diminish her reign. Officials burn records. A few who once praised her as divinely chosen now praise heaven's correction in the form of male rule restored. But you still remember. You remember the barefoot girl kneeling in the dust of the Buddhist nunnery, the scent of blood ink on a secret decree, the soft clink of a jade hairpin falling to the palace floor before a death sentence. She made a kingdom into a weapon and wielded it like a fan, and now she is silent, but not gone. There is a strange, quiet power in the way she accepts her exile, not with fear, not even grief, but with that same impossible poise she showed the first time. She picked up a brush and wrote her name, Wu Zhaoin, the corner of a forgotten scroll. You hear she dies peacefully. Some months later, no spectacle, no violence, just sleep. A woman who ruled as emperor, not empress until the very end. You linger in the hush after Wu Zetian's death, half expecting thunder or wind or fire to mark the end of her reign. But no, the world continues on with alarming indifference. The mandarins bow, the drums roll, the succession resumes, and the imperial court does what it does best, forgets, or tries to. You stand in the hall of supreme harmony, the very place where she once addressed her ministers with a voice like sharpened silk. Her throne is there, still smaller now, oddly sunken, like it's trying to disappear into the tiles. No longer flanked by phoenixes, no longer warmed by fire pits beneath. Her banners have been removed. The scent of camellia oil and sandalwood has long since faded. Now the dragon rules again, Li Dan. Now restored as Emperor Rizong does his best to scrub away her fingerprints. But oh, they're everywhere. You see her echoes in court rituals she rewrote, laws she reformed, bureaucrats she trained. Even her enemies now operate inside a world shaped by her hands, and no one dares speak of it. Not openly, not yet, still. You catch it in whisper servants, muttering prayers beside the lotus pond. Old eunuchs drawing her characters in the dust with their fingers. They say her spirit lingers in the tower where she spent her final months. A cold wind moves through that wing at night, despite all the doors being closed. One page even claims he saw her reflection in a polished bronze mirror, looking back, with a slight, knowing smile. You don't say this aloud. Of course, not in the new regime. Instead, you do what the others do. Adjust to the silence and the palace. It doesn't stop for long. It can't, because now that Wu Zetian is gone, every clan who once knelt before her is jostling for space in the court again. Old rivalries reignite. Power blocks reform like ice crystals under pressure. And her children, they prove disappointing lie. Dan is too quiet, too cautious. His reign is short, bookended by bowed heads and footnotes. It's his brother Li Shan, yes, the same Li Shan whom Wu once exiled, who retakes the throne as Emperor Zhongzong. You'd think he'd honor his mother's legacy, but no, he's too busy asserting himself. So he turns to his wife, Empress Wei. Empress Wei, if Wu Zetian had built her authority over decades. Balancing cruelty with charm, Empress Wei attempts the same only in half the time, with twice the arrogance and none of the patience. She cuts officials, promotes her lovers, and models herself on Wu, down to the hair ornaments and jade writing brushes. It doesn't go well. Historians still argue whether Empress Wei genuinely believed she could rule as Wu Hador if she simply tried to weaponize the memory of female power for her own gain. Either way, she's no Wu. Her coup is clumsy, rushed. When she attempts to install her daughter as heir, the backlash is immediate. You watch as palace guards, those same halls again, charge through the corridors in the middle of the night. Empress Wei is dragged from her rooms, her documents burned, her name stripped from official records, her daughter poisoned. A brutal reminder, there will be no second Wu Zetian, and what of her legacy? Here it gets strange. You see, Wu was never posthumously honored as an emperor. Not officially. Her name is recorded awkwardly. Empress Wu. The Zetian Emperor, Heavenly Empress Wu, like no one quite knows how to categorize her. It's like trying to shelve lightning between two bookends. Her tomb. It stands in the Qinling Mausoleum, side by side with her husband, Emperor Gaozong. They buried her in silk and jade, placed her beneath thousands of tons of stone and soil. On her stele, that massive slab of marble, there are no words, not a single one. It's just blank. That's the strangest tribute of all, isn't it? As if language couldn't do her justice, or as if everyone was too afraid to try. You wonder who made that decision. Maybe Wu herself, maybe her sons, maybe the court historians who, for all their calligraphy skills, couldn't agree on what she was. An emperor, a usurper, a witch, a genius. What remains of her life is a puzzle made of half-burned scrolls and second-hand gossip. The Tang Dynasty's official chronicles skip key details, gloss over betrayals, invent neat endings where there were none. The stories that survive of her poisoning rivals, executing children, seducing priests, consulting often repeated but rarely sourced, and yet they persist. You learn of her poems, yes, she wrote them. Slim verses inked on silk, tucked into boxes, hidden behind paintings. One survives, a line about lotus flowers blooming in the mud. Another speaks of the moonlight on palace tiles, and how even queens sleep alone. Some scholars think they're forgeries, others insist they're real. A few say she wrote in cipher, tucking meanings between lines like folded paper cranes. Of course she did. That would be so Wu. In time, new dynasties rise and fall. The Song, the Yuan, the Ming. Each one rediscovers Wu Zetian like a forbidden book on a dusty shelf. Sometimes they admire her, sometimes they condemn her, but they never ignore her. Even in modern China, she sparks debate. Some see her as a feminist icon, a woman who shattered the imperial ceiling with nothing but ink, blood, and willpower. Others call her a tyrant, a despot, a cautionary tale, but the one thing no one calls her is forgettable. You close your eyes and picture her young, fierce, watching you from behind lacquered screens and silk curtains. You feel the weight of her ambition, her isolation, her hunger to be seen, not merely obeyed. You see her not just as a ruler, but as a human being, brilliant, lonely, terrifying, and somehow still soft around the edges, like paper that's been folded too many times. She ruled like no woman before her, and no woman has ruled China since. That silence, it's not just history, it's prophecy. You wake, metaphorically, in the years after Wu Zetian's death, watching from behind embroidered screens as dynasties claw their way through time, some tripping over their robes, others drowning in their own splendor. But always, somewhere, beneath the scrolls and incense, her presence endures. You're in a room where scholars whisper of her in halftones, where painted portraits are retouched to soften her features, and where scribes mutter her name before setting ink to pages. If invoking a ghost, there's something sacred about her memory now, or cursed. Maybe both. In this quieter period, Wu's influence calcifies into legend. You walk through Chang'an, now decayed, overgrown in parts, and find her symbols still scratched into stone lanterns, etched in tiles, woven into rugs sold in back alleys, a phoenix stitched next to a dragon, sometimes inverted. A child selling charms insists they protect against betrayal. You buy one, out in the provinces. Traveling monks claim to have seen her in dreams. A woman of fire and stars, sitting cross-legged on a throne of lotus petals, eyes closed, lips moving soundlessly. They say she still judges, that she watches the men who rule, waiting to return if they falter. You smile, Wu Zetian, as a cosmic judge. That tracks. What's remarkable isn't just the staying power of her myth, it's how it evolves. Unlike so many rulers fossilized into single traits, Wu keeps shifting in the cultural mirror. In poetry, she's the moon-faced enchantress. In folk tales, she's the mother of justice. In whispered rumors, she's the sorceress empress who boiled her enemies in golden cauldrons. Historians still argue whether the darker stories were crafted posthumously to defame her, or whether she leaned into the performance of monstrosity to maintain control. After all, nothing clears a room like the scent of iron and power. You think of her as a woman who held the world in her lacquered fingertips, knowing it would slip eventually, but gripping it anyway. The Tang Dynasty rewrites her. The Yuan erases her. The Ming rehabilitates her, ever so slightly, just enough to invoke her as a cautionary tale during court intrigues, yet not enough to allow her as a model. By the Qing, she's spoken of as a curiosity, an aberration, a glitch in the celestial plan. Still, she refuses to fade. In 1667, a group of Jesuit missionaries visiting China get their first exposure to her tale. They're confused. A woman emperor. Surely the locals must be exaggerating. The missionaries send reports back to Europe, and there, across salons and smoky study halls, Wu becomes a Rorschach test for the West's own fears. To some, she's the ultimate Eastern despot, exotic, cruel, unrelenting. To others, she's a wonder-proof, that even in a supposedly rigid Confucian society, a woman could rise through pure will. Voltaire references her. Later, Simone de Beauvoir. Even gossip columnists get in on it by the 1920s, calling her China's Catherine the Great, but sharper. You realize then, her story is never static. It's rewritten by every generation that touches it. In modern textbooks, you find her tucked between units on temps, poetry, and civil service exams. She's sometimes reduced to a single question on a multiple-choice test. Other times, she's the centerpiece of entire university modules. Debate flows hot. Was she a proto-feminist or a cold autocrat? Should we judge her by the standards of her era war hours? A quirky tidbit surfaces. An early 20th century warlord, Zhong Zuolin, supposedly kept a carved jade statue of Wu Zetian on his desk. He claimed it helped him make hard decisions. Whether that's true or apocryphal, who knows? It's delicious. Either way, you think of how Wu might have laughed at that. How she'd loathe being used by men seeking validation. And yet, she might have also admired their instinct for power. In the 1960s, during China's Cultural Revolution, her image is dusted off and recast again. The Red Guards briefly elevate her as a symbol of revolutionary spirit, a woman who crushed the old order, until, of course, they remember she became the old order. Back to the shelf she goes. Now present day, you find her again in dramas, in documentaries, in YouTube thumbnails. She's there with sculpted brows, satin robes, and eyeliner like knife tips. Sometimes they get the history right. Usually they don't, but it doesn't matter. Wu has become more than biography. She's mythic infrastructure. You sit in front of a screen, watching a streaming series about her life. The lighting is too warm, the sword's too shiny, but still you feel that old pull. In the story, she walks into court wearing armor beneath her robes, outmaneuvering the chancellors in a single conversation. It's cheesy and brilliant. You whisper she would have approved. One final thought catches you off guard. You remember a line from a Tang scholar, a man who never met her but wrote, "She ruled like the night, brilliant, vast, and impossible to name." You stare at that, yes, that's it, not because it praises her, but because it doesn't try to contain her. Wu Zetian's secret life in the inner court was never about silk or poetry or even blood. It was about the silence that followed her every step, the quiet reshaping of the world, done not with thunder but with ink, the way she rewrote the rules by pretending to follow them, how she made ambition itself feminine dangerously, gorgeously so. Even now, centuries later, you sit with her echo pressed close to your chest, and whether you love her or fear her, one thing's clear, you never look away. The night air in Luoyang smells of charcoal and plum blossoms. You're gliding through its stone corridors, again, not as an empress, not as a servant, but as something between, a ghost, a guest, or maybe just a dreamer. The palace has been rebuilt and destroyed so many times it's hard to tell what's original anymore. But the bones remember, and so do you. The marble slabs beneath your feet, worn to a satin polish, once echoed with the shuffle of Wu Zetian slippers. In the grand chamber, a tour guide gestures toward an empty pedestal. Here once stood a statue of the only female emperor in Chinese history, she explains. She had it removed before her death. The group murmurs in surprise, but you know why she did it. See. Wu Zetian left behind a tombstone, but deliberately blank. No glowing epitaph, no list of titles, no poems etched in her honor. Just an enormous stele standing silent outside the kindling mausoleum. That's your quirky fact for tonight. The woman who controlled language, decrees, and court chronicles refused to write her own legacy in stone. Historians still argue whether that was an act of humility, defiance, or a final riddle for the ages. You smile because that blank tablet says more than any biography ever could. You walk further in, toward the inner courts, where the silk rustled like wind and secrets. This is where Wu ruled, not with armies, but with chessboard minds. Her network of informants, many of them palace women, remained loyal even after her fall. One eunuch, they say, wept at her funeral until he collapsed from dehydration. That might be an exaggeration, but hey, court rumors were basically the Tang Dynasty's version of Reddit threads. And yet, for all the paranoia, there was loyalty. Love, even. You pass through her private library, now reconstructed in cedar and glass. The scrolls are long, gone, burned, stolen, lost, but the alcove design remains, curved like a rib cage. This is where she reviewed reports, wrote poetry, strategized. Some scholars believe she translated Buddhist sutras here, not just reading, but annotating them in the margins. Her notes, they say, carried traces of regret, wishing she could return to a simpler, contemplative life. Others dismiss that as romantic revisionism. Wu didn't do simple, one academic scoffs. And yet, there's something wistful in the quiet here. As if she once whispered dreams into these wooden beams, and they still hold the echo. Outside, you find a cluster of schoolchildren. Their teacher asks, "Who can tell me who Wu Zetian was?" A girl raises her hand. She was a woman who became emperor, not empress-emperor, the same as the men. The teacher nods. And how did she do that? By being smarter than everyone. Not wrong. You remember how she played the bureaucracy like a Gukinich finger press calibrated to produce exactly the note she needed. Even her enemies couldn't agree on what they hated more, her ruthlessness, or the fact that she got results. Under her rule, the civil service exam system expanded, roads improved, agriculture stabilized. She promoted talented commoners into positions of power. And yes, she killed rivals, silenced critics, and ruled with an iron brush. But even her detractors admitted the empire worked. One Confucian scholar begrudgingly noted, her reign was ordered, if unnatural. You think about how much of history is written that way through clenched teeth and biased ink. In recent years, Chinese feminists have reclaimed her as a complex icon. Neither saint nor villain, but a woman who played a man's game better than most men ever could. You scroll through blog posts, essays, online debates. One viral tweet reads, "Wu Zetian walked so Beyoncé could run. It's ridiculous, and absolutely perfect." The past always finds a way to squeeze into the present, wearing just enough disguise to be trendy. Wu would have adored the memes. She'd have had burner Weibo accounts, secret Discord servers with Buddhist scholars and political analysts, probably a pseudonymous TikTok with flawless eyeliner tutorials and slow-motion throne walks. But in truth, Wu wasn't trying to be a role model. She was trying to survive, to rule. And every decision she made, whether to drown a threat in honey or to elevate a girl from the kitchens to headmaid, was about securing power. You sit on a replica stool in one of her reconstructed tea gardens. The wind moves the reeds like murmuring courtiers. A plaque reads, "May her silence speak for her." And you can't help but wonder, was the blank tombstone a dare, an invitation, or a trap? You imagine her voice again, cool as polished jade, but with a hint of laughter underneath. She leans in close and says, "You tell me," because she's not finished, not really. Her influence lingers in how we talk, about women in power, about ambition, about the double standards carved into the walls of every palace and office since time began. She's not just a historical figure, she's an argument, a conversation starter, a mirror, and now, in this garden, under this sky, she's also your bedtime ghost sipping tea, eyebrows arched, daring you to underestimate her one more time. The sun's dropped behind the hills now, casting the Luoyang sky in that bruised purple shade you only see for about 5 minutes between twilight and dark. The palace lights flicker on one by one, quiet amber glows in a sea of shadows. You're still here, still walking the stone veins of the inner court like someone chasing a half-remembered face. And there she is, Wu Zetian. Not in silks this time, but in plain robes, hair loose, feet bare, eyes soft. You've caught her at the very end, when the titles have been taken. The palace turned against her, and the throne passed to her son. This is what they don't teach. You in school, the final years, after decades of control, paranoia, whispers, and courtly chess. It ends in betrayal. Her beloved Zhong brothers, their names once coiled sweetly, around her tongue are dragged from her chambers and executed in the courtyard. She doesn't scream, she doesn't beg, she watches. Quietly, some say she had already known it was coming. Others think she was too ill to resist. She was likely suffering from arthritis, possibly dementia. Her letters became erratic, her sleeping hours reversed. But don't assume she was entirely gone. Wu was never just a mind, she was a will, even at her weakest. She wrote one last decree. To abdicate her son, Zhongzong, was restored to the throne, the same son she once deposed. You almost admire the symmetry if it weren't so bitter. They say he entered her sick room with tears in his eyes. He bowed to her, called her emperor one last time, and she responded only with a nod. It was enough. She retreated from court life to Shangyang Palace, a quieter compound by the river. And there, surrounded by lotus ponds and lacquered scroll cabinets, she slowly slipped into silence. Here's your mainstream fact for this section. She died in the year 705, at the age of 80, an astonishing lifespan for that era, especially given the political daggers pointed at her since her teenage years. For context, the average Temps noble didn't make it much past 50, but she didn't die peacefully. Rumors still flit through history's attic that she was poisoned, that she was murdered in her sleep by eunuchs loyal to the Jiangs, that she starved herself out of pride. No solid proof, no reliable witness, just fading voices and cold teacups, the only thing certain. When she died, they stripped her of her title. No longer Emperor Zetian of Zhou, just Empress Wu of Tang, reduced again. In death, to the wife of a long-dead emperor, it's a petty move. Predictable, the Confucian scholars had been sharpening their ink brushes for decades, waiting to bury her in bad press. They called her a monster, a usurper, a corrupter of heaven's natural order, and yet her tomb was given imperial honors. The imperial family still respected her, even as they erased her on paper. Historians still argue whether this contradiction was out of guilt, fear, or simply that no one could quite figure out what to do with her. You walk along the palace's old reflecting pool, now cracked and dry. Dragonflies hover over puddles, catching the last of the light. And you try to picture what she thought in those final days. Did she feel regret? Satisfaction? Did she remember the first time she stepped into the palace, barely more than a girl, with her incense hair and calligraphy perfect posture? Or did she think of her rivals, the sisters she buried, the husbands she outwitted? Maybe she thought of her daughters. Yes, she had several. Few lived long. And there's one heartbreaking fringe theory, found in a dusty commentary by a Tang poet, that she quietly mourned a daughter executed by her own order in a moment of paranoia. The record is fragmentary, probably fiction, but it adds a human crack to the marble statue, because for all her brilliance, she was still trapped in the same palace web as every other woman. There's something achingly modern about that. The power she wielded was unprecedented, yes, but always conditional, always up for debates. Even as emperor, she was surrounded by threats from within her own family, not just ministers. She had to justify every move, every breath, and the second she weakened, it all unraveled. You pass an old bronze incense burner shaped like a phoenix, now green with age. The symbol was hers rising from ashes, beautiful and terrible, impossible to cage. But here's the kicker. Wu Zetian wasn't buried alone when her tomb was finally sealed at Qinling. It was beside her husband, Emperor Gaozong, the man whose death let her rise. They're interred together in a shared burial mound, side by side under the Loess Hills. Above them stands the famed blank stele, a partnership in life and death. Or one last way to control the narrative. One modern historian put it like this: she left the world with more questions than answers. That's power, that's legacy. You sit down on the temple stairs, heart heavy but weirdly inspired. She may have been dethroned, she may have been posthumously downgraded, but she also left behind a template, however controversial, for generations of women who wondered, what if I didn't wait my turn? And suddenly, your modern concerns Emil's deadlines, glass ceilings feel a little less impossible after all. If a concubine with no claim to anything could rule the greatest empire on earth, what's your excuse? You smile in the dark. Wu Zetian is gone, but she's not finished with you yet. The wind rises gently as you sit in the long grass near the Qinling mausoleum, where Wu Zetian rests beneath that vast hill of silence. You glance up at the monolithic stele towering above her tomb, solid, weathered, and, famously, blank dot, no inscription, no deeds, no crimes, no glories, just nothing. It's one of the great riddles of Chinese imperial history. Every other emperor's grave is marked with titles, accomplishments, a list of heaven-sanctioned victories. But hers, not a single word. The official reason, her deeds speak for themselves. The unofficial one, no one could agree on what those deeds were. You run your fingers through the cool earth and imagine the palace scholars, brush in hand, arguing day and night should she be remembered as a tyrant or a reformer, a feminist icon or a power-hungry opportunist. Should her story be a warning or a prophecy? Historians still argue whether the blank stele was her choice, her son's, or forced by bitter ministers who couldn't stomach a woman standing shoulder to shoulder with emperors. Maybe it was her final play. Let them decide. Let them remember me by what I made them feel, not what they dared to write down. Now, you close your eyes. Let's drift back one last time, not to her throne room, or her execution orders, or her midnight rituals, but to a garden. Wu is young, again 16, maybe 17, and she's strolling through the Tang Palace gardens with a bamboo fan tucked under one arm. She hasn't become emperor yet, not even consort. She's just one of many court women, overlooked and underestimated. But her eyes are already alert. Her fingers pause on every peach blossom, not because they're beautiful, but because she's memorizing the pattern of how they open. Because that's what she does. Observe, adapt, unfold. There's a fringe anecdote, too strange to be fiction, that as a teen she kept a hidden journal where she ranked the personalities of every concubine in the palace. Notes on weaknesses, how they walked, who they whispered to, even who they avoided. One servant girl later swore Wu had predicted 5 of the women's downfalls years in advance. If true, it suggests her game began far earlier than history credits. But, all plots aside, you start to notice something else. She loved beauty. For all her cruelty, her manipulation, her paranoia, she deeply loved music, poetry, and the finer trappings of being alive. She commissioned new musical arrangements, kept a rotating staff of painters, and often asked to be read poetry late at night. She was once so moved by a moonlit performance on the Guqian that she ordered a garden pavilion built specifically for listening to echoes. No matter how brutal her politics were, she still cried at verse. And yes, there were tears. You won't find them in the annals, but they slip through in minor court account scribes, mentioning her eyes reddened after seeing a particular dancer, or how she retired to her quarters for 3 days after reading a certain Buddhist sutra. She wasn't a monster. She was a person brilliant, haunted, and crushingly aware that she would never be allowed to make a single mistake. Imagine the pressure. Imagine being right most of the time, and still being hated because of who you are. You walk now through the fictional echoes of her private study, its scrolls lined up in neat calligraphic rows. The walls are draped in pale blue silk. There's a red lacquer desk, probably covered in half-written decrees and notes in her fast, almost impatient handwriting. You pick up one of them. It's a fragment of a tax reform policy she once pushed through that saved thousands of farmers from forced labor. Nobody ever thanks her for that. That's the paradox. The people she helped never knew her name. The elites who knew her name never forgave her power. And the men who recorded her story made sure to double down on every suspicion, every excess, every shadow. But you've been with her for the whole journey now. From her quiet debut in Gozong's court to her ruthless chess match for the throne. Through murder, reform, myth, paranoia, to this final hush beneath the Loess Hills. She's become something more than historical. She's become yours, and what will you do with her now? Keep her in your memory as a cautionary tale, a bedtime ghost, a strange footnote to empire, or will you let her be a challenge? Will you remember that the woman who tore apart a dynasty also built something, knew something that outlasted her, that she expanded the civil service, opened more schools to lower classes, and allowed greater religious freedom, especially for Buddhism, which flourished under her rule. She did terrible things, yes, and she also did great things, and that's the truth. Most history books can't handle that. Both can exist in the same person. You reach the final chamber of her mausoleum now. Dust floats in the air like lazy stars. And there, on the far wall, painted in ghostly fading ink, is a phoenix curled around the moon. Her symbol, still here, still flying. The corridor behind you darkens. One last door stands before you, wooden, iron-studded, neither grand nor humble. You press it open and step into a quiet room at the edge of time. This is the last chamber of Wu Zetian's life, where everything unwinds. You're no longer among jade tiles or golden screens. Here, the walls are plain clay. A simple brazier smoulders low in the corner. The air is thick with sandalwood smoke and the weariness of an empress who's held power far too long. Wu Zetian is old now. Her hair is silver, not pinned in phoenix combs, but tied loosely with a cord. Her robes, though still elegant, hang heavily. From narrow shoulders, age has thinned her cheeks and stiffened her walk. But her eyes they burn with that same uncompromising clarity. The eyes that once read entire dossiers in a glance. That made ministers quake with a single flicker of disapproval. And now she's surrounded by silence. You might expect her final days to be filled with glory or paranoia, but what you find is something quieter, not peace, exactly. Just a tired kind of vigilance. Like a soldier sleeping with one eye open, she still writes little notes on scraps of silk, observations, warnings, wishes. There's a drawer by her bed, filled with them, some addressed to her sons, others to no one in particular. She's aware that her reign is ending, that the men she once crushed are returning, vultures circling an old lioness. You watch her hold a brush with shaking hands. The characters are less precise now, but they hold. She's recording her thoughts for a history that might never listen. And then the whisper begins. Her ministers knock. They come not as servants, but as heirs to a throne they never dared touch while she ruled it. They want her to abdicate. They bow deeply, but the betrayal hangs in the room like frost. She listens. She doesn't rage. She doesn't scream. She nods once, slowly, because she has seen this moment for decades, planned for it, even welcomed it. And so, at 79, Wu Zetian becomes mortal again. She steps down. Her son, Zhongzong, takes the throne, though it's not clear how much of it he truly holds. The court immediately begins erasing her. Her name is removed from records. Her title, emperor, is revoked. Statues of her are melted down. Edicts she passed are revised or cancelled. It's a slow unraveling, like moths chewing through silk, and yet she never disappears entirely. In private, some still whisper her name with awe. The poor remember the tax reliefs, the irrigation systems. Poets, centuries later, write verses to her ambition. Even in her defanged legacy, something dangerous still glimmers. The stele remains blank. You sit with her now in her final hours. She lies on a low bed, her head resting on a bamboo pillow. A servant girl, perhaps the only one brave enough to dabs her forehead with a cool cloth. Outside, cicadas rasp in the pines. There's no grand last speech, just a single, muttered phrase. Everything ends as it should, and then silence. But something odd happens. Not long after her burial, rumors begin to swirl, not of ghosts or vengeance, but of strange omens. A comet passes low over Ch'nan peacocks. Her favorite birds return to the palace gardens. In the months that follow, a Buddhist monk claims to see her face in a cave painting in Dunhuang painted centuries before her birth. Was it her, a divine echo, or just the kind of eerie coincidence history loves to gift to complicated women? Historians still argue whether Wu Zetian's legacy was one of progress or devastation. Some call her China's Catherine the Great. Others insist she was simply a tyrant in silk. But every new decade seems to soften the verdict, peeling back another layer of the caricature to reveal a person, one who played the only game she was ever allowed to play, and won it longer than anyone expected. You walk now beneath twilight, tracing your way back through the forbidden city's ghost corridors. The stone beneath your feet remembers her steps. The wind through the pines remembers her whispers. And maybe, just maybe, the future will remember her not as a scandal, but as a story still worth telling. And that brings us to the soft ending you've earned. You lie still now, far from thrones and court intrigues, lulled by the weight of centuries settling into calm. The empire fades around you like mist across morning fields. No more palace walls, no more shadowed halls, just the slow hush of history, falling asleep. You picture the garden, again the one from long ago where Wu once paused by a plum tree in full bloom. The breeze lifts her sleeve, and for a moment, she's not a ruler, not a villain, not a name scribbled and crossed out in red ink. She's just a girl in springtime, squinting toward a sky filled with birds, and you're watching from the shade, listening to the hush of the leaves. Your thoughts growing drowsy. Breathe in. Let the rhythms of old China fade into the background. The courtly voices, the clash of opinions, even the rise and fall of empires all softened now into a single, steady heartbeat. Breathe out. Your journey through Wu Zetian's world is done. You've seen her secrets, felt her ambition, heard the echoes of a woman who defied every law written against her, and still, she remains lingering, complex, unforgettable. So rest now. You've walked the whole dynasty. The stars wheel overhead. The fan hums faintly, and somewhere in the deep archives of time, a phoenix lifts off in silence and disappears into the dusk.